I'm
Sorry,
excited.
I got distracted. The ADHD in me forced me to look that up properly.
Like literally.
Literally.
So, hi everyone. It is officially the 2nd of March as we're recording this, and guess what that means? That means it is Women's History Month. So,
Woo!
of course, we like to do everything with purpose and intention, I guess. So, we're going to talk about some memoirs that we've been reading or listening to. Yes, you heard that right. Alysha and I have joined Rylee in the audiobook world recently. And we're going to talk about some of those stories that we've gotten to learn from different memoirs. So essentially, we're going to talk about women as told in those memoirs. And then, of course, as usual, we like to get a little analytical here at Like Literarily. So we're going to talk about some things that we found that we like and don't like about the memoirs as well. So, just to reintroduce myself after that brief introduction for what to expect today, I am Alexis, better known as Momo or Momo's Bookshelf.
I'm Riley from Riley Tries Hobbies.
And I'm Alysha.
All right, hopping into this. I personally only started listening to memoirs last year, kind of when, there was a lot of well-deserved hype around Jeanette McCurdy's I'm Glad My Mom Died. That was really the first one I've listened to, I think, ever. I'm not a big nonfiction reader. And I was surprised by how much I just enjoyed reading it and how I kind of just took off from there. Since then, I've read five other um, memoirs in general. Because I'm not a big nonfiction reader, I was very hesitant going into it, but now I've learned that I do like them, and it's kind of opened up a whole new genre for me. So thanks, Jeanette McCurdy. I appreciate you. What about you, Alysha?
Yeah, I guess I get to thank you because I started reading them because you started suggesting them. So, one of those cyclical things. I very much also am like, if I'm going to read in my spare time, I'm going to read fiction books. I read enough nonfiction for my job. I don't want to read nonfiction in my spare time, but I've learned I don't mind the memoirs. I have also learned I don't mind memoirs as audiobooks, but I'll get more into that later. But yeah, very similar to Rylee read my first memoir in recent history last year, kicking off with Girls Can Kiss Now, which was like a series of essays. And yeah, very much found that I enjoyed like the reflection and recounting that she was having upon her life and kept seeking them out after that. I know between the three of us, we have quite the list of memoirs that we've read um, here in the last few months. So for this episode, as Alexis said, like we're focusing on memoirs that were written by women for Women's History Month. But Alexis, what are some that you've read?
So I have the shortest list out of everybody just because I've been trying to catch up on my what seems like never-ending TBR. And so I have also read I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I also listened to The Women in Me by Britney Spears, and I also listened to Thinking in Pictures: My Life with Autism by Temple Grandin. And I started listening to Finding Me by Viola Davis, which was recommended to me by my aunt who listens to this podcast. And I did end up running out of listening minutes on Spotify Premium, but I was about halfway. So I was like almost done with it for the most part. And hers was super emotional and dark and raw. And the things that she went through was crazy, but it really does explain why she plays a lot of roles that she plays in the amazing way that she plays them. Um, Temple Grandin's, if you don't know who she is pretty well known for her work with like more humane treatment of animals that are being, oh my gosh, what's the word that I'm thinking of? They're about to get, like butchered for food. I guess the issue that she found was that a lot of people were like very unempathetic and inhumane towards the treatment of them as this was happening. And because of the way that she just kind of thinks in pictures with having autism, she could kind of bring herself to thinking as if she was the animal. And she was super intelligent and really, 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 really smart. And basically like engineered things in a lot more of a humane way. And a lot of the way that things are in that industry now are probably thanks to her. The book was really, really information heavy, and I'm glad that I listened to it and didn't read it because I learned so much about her perspective of life and autism in general, and just the way that research has changed and the things that we've learned about autism. But I definitely was like, oh my gosh, that is a lot of information. So I listened to it in pieces. I'm glad my mom died. I read the physical copy, really sad, really good. I watched iCarly, so um definitely felt like a really sad piece from my childhood. And then Britney Spears, I listened to hers. It was narrated by Michelle Williams, which I believe Rylee has stated in another podcast episode of ours. And it just felt like I was listening and having a conversation with her, which I really, really enjoyed. Everybody else's list is a little bit more lengthy than mine, so
Yeah, okay. So I also listened to The Woman in Me by Britney Spears, and obviously I already talked about I'm Glad My Mom Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I agree with your view on The Woman in Me. I also think it was just like, I don't know. A lot of these, it takes a lot to be open and vulnerable to like, obviously write your own memoir. So I don't know. I would just really appreciate that from pretty much everyone that I read. They all felt genuine. The other books that or memoirs I read Down the Drain by Julia Fox. She's been quoted saying that it's a masterpiece, and she said that actually before she even wrote the book. And then she kind of had to like prove herself while she was writing it that it was going to be a masterpiece. And I have to agree, it was very, very well done. I also listened to Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner from Japanese Breakfast. Which was just a very interesting look at her life and her relationship with her mom and being half Korean. And I don't know, it was very good. Then I listened to Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher, aka Princess Leia, aka many other things, an amazing actress, a great author. Um, but that was written based on her one woman show that she had in the early 2000s. So it was interesting just listening to it from obviously a time in her life that was a while ago before she had passed, and then just hearing about her experience with addiction and her parents and everything else. And because it was based on her one woman show, it also had a lot of humor in it, which I really appreciated. Um, let's see. And then lastly, The Wind at My Back by Misty Copeland. That one not only explored her own life as the first principal black ballerina in the American Ballet Theater, as well as her mentor, Raven Wilkinson, who was a dancer in the same ballet many years earlier, and kind of explores the history of Raven Wilkinson's life and white trailblazer she was for um, Black women in ballet and how she lived through times of extreme racism and how that racism still existed in ballet with Misty Copeland in the during like Obama's presidency and still now. So that was very refreshing. I don't know a lot about ballet. Obviously, I never did ballet growing up. My sister did, but it was a good story and it was a good reflection piece for Misty Copeland. I really enjoyed it. Um, Alysha, do you want to tell us about all the ones that you've read? I know you've really been reading a lot.
Started cranking out some on audiobooks this past couple of weeks. I pushed out to our Instagram, like if anybody had any suggestions, and a lot of suggestions came through. And I was like, ooh, I really should have posted this much sooner. Not a week and a half from our recording. And so yeah, I was cranking out some audiobooks in the last couple days. But yeah, I'll highlight a few. A lot of them have also been covered. So Girls Can Kiss Now, which is a series of essays, it was about the author's like journey towards like realizing her own identity and like wrestling with that with like the stereotypes of the early 2000s. And so that was a really good read. Becoming by Michelle Obama, I think probably like iconic, Michelle Obama, but her experience of like meeting Barack, like figuring out who she was in the presidency, and just like all the dynamics that come along with your husband now being president, was fascinating. I have also read the I'm Glad My Mom Died and The Woman in Me memoirs, that have already been mentioned along with Down the Drain, so I won't recap those ones. But then moving in some of them that had been recommended to me, I listened to almost all of these on audiobook except for the last one, But The Girl with Seven Names was about an individual who defected from North Korea and like her journey of getting back to a space, getting back to a space that felt like home. I also read I'm Still Here, Black Dignity in a World Made for Whiteness, which was a book by an author describing how she's come to term with her own blackness and like understanding what white spaces mean to her and how she experiences them. But then it also explores just like racism, microaggressions, and just like how we have actions we may not even be aware of due to like the stereotypes and biases that we have in our mind. I also read Wishful Drinking because I saw Rylee was reading it on Storygraph, and so I checked it out while I was driving so I could listen to it. And yeah, like Rylee said, that was a very entertaining read. But then I had whiplash because I started crying in the H Mart, which was so good, but it's so sad. And we can talk more about that one a little bit later. To round out my list, also listen to The Dressmaker of Kher Kana, which was about a woman in Afghanistan during the rise of the Taliban and how she started her own sewing business to keep her family housed and fed. And that was really well done. It was written by a journalist who went over and like interviewed her and her family. And then the most recent one I finished was Bury My Heart at Chuck E. Cheese, which was largely a series of like short essays written largely in the style of satire by a Native American woman. So that was nice, long, and listy. So maybe before we jump into things we do and do not like about memoirs, is there like a memoir you guys really want to read that you were not able to read before this podcast?
For me, one that was recommended, this one isn't by a woman, but it is about the women in his life, women in his life. Trevor Noah's Born a Crime was recommended to me by my friend Jess, and she said it was like one of the best books she's read, and that's one that I would like to pick up. Um, I don't know. I also find it respectable when men talk about how much the women in their lives, contributed to them. I think that's important. So that's definitely
I've
on
heard
my
that
list of
one.
things.
I've heard that one is really, really good. So I've had that one flagged as well. Um,
Yeah.
I'll have to
I,
hear your review.
I had never
Yeah.
heard of that one, so I'll have to add that one onto my list too.
Yeah, and then Cynthia, my friend Cynthia, she was in Society of Women Engineers with me and Alysha, but she said that Billie Jean King's is supposed to also be really good, and that's all in an biography.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was kind of so as we picked this idea, memoirs were kind of a new thing to me, so I wasn't really sure like who's to pick or like where to look for more, I guess. So I was, just dabbling my toe in the pool of memoirs and in the midst of all this though, was, as you all know, rereading Harry Potter and I finished it. So I was like, why not listen to Tom Felton's? And he narrated his own. I listened to the audiobook of that one as well. And I flew through that one. He is so funny. He was cracking jokes and singing and doing voices throughout the whole thing. And honestly, I know he's a guy and he wrote it, but personally, the way he spoke about everyone was so respectful, so kind, the way he looked back on his memories and the things that he had been through. He just was like really, really great about it, and especially regarding, the friendship with Emma Watson, and we know she's our feminist Hermione Queen, and just like how they kind of had feelings for each other and it was always bad times, but they like remained friends. And I just really liked that he was really respectful about everybody that he came across in his journey and kind of like where he's at now looking back. So I really enjoy listening to his if you haven't listened to it already.
And so, on that note of what we enjoy and maybe what we don't enjoy so much, what are some things you guys took away from reading memoirs?
So personally, I love when memoirs sound like I'm conversing with the person, especially if I'm listening to the audiobook, kind of like how I was talking about earlier. I also think with that, now that I've read a couple and now that I've listened to a couple, I definitely prefer listening to them, pretty much backtracking to that same point. Like I like when it kind of sounds like I'm talking to that person or conversing with that person. I really, really do enjoy feeling like I'm getting to know somebody and kind of like how they got to where they got in their life because especially, most memoirs are obviously written by celebrities and I feel like society as a whole looks at celebrities in this like pedestal kind of like, oh, I'm gonna put this person on a pedestal, like they're just non-human, and that's just not true. They're obviously a human like the rest of us. And so I think it was a really nice perspective, especially since we read memoirs written by women, to read just how strong women are and about the things that we go through and the way that we handle it and the way that I feel like we always work so hard to try to come out on top. I really felt inspired, honestly. I don't have a lot of negatives, but I really just think that the big thing that I don't like is when I feel like if it's you're writing the memoir in the midst of kind of the things that are going on, that you don't really have a sense of a reflection piece because you're still kind of making your way out of that situation. And obviously life is not cookie cutter. There's not the movie ending or book ending of, oh, okay, that's the end, like this is it. But things change, and I think that you can't reflect as well as you could on a situation if you're still kind of in that situation because you're still learning and adjusting and stuff like that. So that's kind of like the only negative that I had from the ones that I listened to and read. But really overall, like I said, I like to just read about how strong and honestly amazing women are. Like we go through a lot. So what are your guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I would agree on like the reflection thing that you were talking about for the Britney Spears book. It's like I think one thing I've really recognized that I like is when a memoir is like following a specific instance in somebody's life or like some kind of thread, almost like it has a narrative or like a plot where like they're reflecting upon that event and like their takeaways from it or like how they grew as a person or something. And that's I felt like particularly for that Britney Spears book, like she was still very actively in that trauma. And so it just was a little harder to follow the thread throughout that memoir. And like, I don't know, Riley, how about you?
No, I agree. I feel like sometimes in memoirs, people get, when they do get reflective at the end, but they're not necessarily like totally processed through that trauma, it ends up becoming a lot of like repeating the same point over and over, um, which is fine. It's just, it doesn't necessarily move the book along. You know what I mean? It kind of starts to have you back away from the book, which isn't a
Hmm.
bad thing. It just can sometimes be a little bit like, I don't, frustrating's not the right word, but it just becomes a little repetitive.
Yeah, you're
Um,
almost like, okay, lost the point. Like you had me this whole time, and then now you're losing me.
yeah. I guess one other thing that sometimes will annoy me about memoirs, is when there's very obviously a ghostwriter used. It kind of, it's not that it feels disingenuous because everybody needs to, find their own peace and have some boundaries, and that's totally fine. But if it feels like censored or like, I don't know, it's hard to find the right words for this because memoirs are so personal and like I respect people having boundaries when they write them.
Hmm.
Um, but sometimes it just feels disingenuous almost. You know what I mean? Um, so I don't
Yeah,
know. That feels a little bit hard for me when I'm reading a memoir. It just doesn't feel right. I don't know. Does anybody have a comment on that?
like their tone of voice basically sounds overshadowed by the ghostwriter. You're like,
Yeah.
this even written by this person? Like,
That's what I was gonna say is like I think it should be a little more clear, like the role that a ghostwriter plays. Like, are they being a very, very significant editor? Are they like collecting this story from the individual and like writing it back up, like trying to be honorable of the storytelling the person said? Is this like a completely collaborative effort? Like people really push back on celebrities like using them in one. I think if you're just being transparent about it, it's fine.
No, I agree. I feel like it's more so when their role isn't defined. Like I've read a few and they mention them in the like acknowledgments and whatnot. But if it's
Oh
like
yeah,
the
the
role isn't
thank you for
obvious, it's
helping me
hard.
tell my story.
Yeah. And like that makes it a little bit more clear, but as the reader, if you're going into it, or it feels like it like goes back and forth between like the author's words and the ghostwriter's word, or it feels like disjointed a little bit, that's when it like, okay, this is a little strange.
So maybe we transition to some things we like.
The one thing I like is that I feel like for memoirs in general, a lot of people use it as their time to reflect and a way to tell their own story in their own words. I think that's very freeing for people. Like when Britney Spears just talked about all the trauma that she's gone through, and then even talking about her medicated abortion, like I feel like that's so vulnerable to put out into the world. And I don't know, I have a lot of respect for people who are willing to talk about their story like that. I think that's really important.
I didn't particularly enjoy reading the Britney Spears book, to be like completely honest. I felt like I was reading a child's like diary entry almost to a point just due to like what felt like a lack of editing and like cleaning up that narrative. But like she told her story how she wants it to be told. And I think there's a lot of value in that and like just being able to get that out there, like Rylee was saying.
So how do you guys feel when, across like Book Talk or Bookstagram or Goodreads or Storygraph, however you intake reviews and reflections and book recommendations, how do you feel when people put like a rating to a memoir? Because personally, I don't I don't want to like rate them, but I will go off of almost like the pass fail scale. Like I'll say, yes, I recommend this, or like, no, I don't recommend it personally. But the people who rate memoirs, and it's like, how are you rating something because you didn't like how somebody else told their own story? Like, it just personally that bothers me. But what do you guys think? Because I've seen that debate across Bookstagram a lot, especially.
I don't know. For me, I'm still gonna give it like a star review. I won't give a memoir like under a three, but for me, a three is like an average book. So like I think that's fine. But I also just have like a lot of respect for them. So I'm not gonna like write up like a narrative of why I didn't like a book. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if a book isn't well written, like but I still enjoy the story, which is generally what I'm gonna do with memoirs, like I'm still gonna like rate it a three or a four probably. And if it's something I would want to reread, then I would give it a five. Personally, for memoirs, I haven't wanted to reread them. I think part of it is because usually they are very intense. So it's just like one and done is good for me. Um, but I don't know. It is their own story, and I understand why people are hesitant to like rate them, but I feel like I'm okay with rating them. I'm not really okay with bashing them, if that makes sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that rating it that way would make sense 100% to me because you're like, okay, here's my left and right limit here. I'm not going to rate it below this because this is literally not my story to tell. And this person had to be like super vulnerable to put this information out there. But hey, like if I would reread this again and recommend it and everything else above the sun, like, yeah, absolutely, it's a five. So no, that I think that's a fair scale. But some people, when I was reading the reviews on some of these, I was like, gosh, you guys are tough. Like, I was like, geez, this is kind of intense, you guys. Like, you guys are being kind of brutal on somebody else's willingness to go and kind of tell their story about things that they've been through. I was like, wonder what talking to your guys' friends is like. Good Lord.
I
What about
mean, even selfishly though, like I want to look back on my average rating and know what it was for like all the fiction books I read. Like I don't want to try to sprinkle the nonfiction ratings in there. Like, I don't know. That would be like a selfish component to how I'd want to rank them as well. So I've decided I'm not rating memoirs and like the original impetus of that was because like this is somebody's personal story. They can tell it however they want to tell it. But as I was thinking about it more, I was like, I also just don't want to try to rate nonfiction books because it's just not the genre I enjoy the most. And so I know it's going to be skewed. And I would rather be able to look over all my fiction reviews and be like, wow, I read some shit fiction books apparently this year, or I've read some really good ones.
That's
Um,
fair.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think sometimes different genres have to be rated like a different way, based off of the situation involved. Like imagine reading an old history textbook, world history, 2 out of 5.
Yeah. Or like, I don't know, one of those books that you have to read in high school. Like, I'm not going to give The Diary of Anne Frank a 1. Like, that's messed up. Like,
Right. Even if I didn't enjoy reading about something that was as
I
difficult to read
learned
about.
something.
Yeah,
That's the point.
exactly. But Akatar, on the other hand, no, I'm just kidding. I did finish it though. Side note, wasn't that bad.
Congratulations.
I'm very proud of you.
That's been a haul.
Okay,
Oh,
well, if we want to move on from our memoir speak, do we want to talk about what we're going to read next for the pod and what our current reads are?
yes.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
All right. So, our next episode is going to be about the Bronte sisters. So, we're each going to read a book by one of the Bronte sisters and kind of come together and talk about it. For those who are not reading the other's book, we're probably going to spark note it. So, we still have like a discussion about it. But so, yeah, we're going back into the classics. I know we've been stepped away from them since December and A Christmas Story. So, yeah, excited about that. What about you guys? What are you guys reading next or currently reading?
I am currently picking back up A Day of Fallen Night. I had started it back in January and then got sidetracked with the release of the new Crescent City book and then obviously this onslaught of memoirs. So I think I left off on like chapter 8, and that is a dense book. So it's going to be very interesting trying to jump back into that after a month break. But my goal is to read that in like the next couple weeks. As well as I have been rereading Red, White, and Royal Blue. So I would like to finally finish both of those books because they've been lingering for a little while now. Um, and so those are my primary goals here for March.
Nice. What I'm reading right now is I'm about to start my journey into the tandem read for Throne of Glass. So that's Empire of Storms and Tower of Dawn. We're gonna see how it goes, guys. I'm doing this on my Kindle, so I can't like mark the bookmarks as easily because I'm also using like a combined ebook. So it's like every single Throne of Glass book in one.
Yeah, Riley's got this massive ebook where it's like you've made it like 43% of the way through this
42.
journey.
42.
Oh my
I've read
goodness.
so that does in the ebook they have Assassin's Blade at the very end. So I have read that one already. But yeah, I'm like on the fifth book of the series, well, fifth and sixth, and I'm only 42% in. Sarah J. Maas, I love you, but Jesus Christ. Okay,
On
what
that
about
note,
you?
Alexis?
Yeah. On that
Yeah.
note, Alexis.
Well, that definitely takes it smoothly into what I'm currently reading. So I am borrowing a copy of Throne of Glass, gasp, I know, from a friend to officially, now that I've finished the Akatar series, to launch myself into that heap of reading. I have not read much as I did read a whopping 11 books in February.
Woo!
And yeah,
Snaps
I
for
read
Alexis.
yeah, it was a lot. I was getting through them. But I did that on purpose knowing that this month I will be with the military for 2 weeks, so I knew that this month would be a little bit of a slower one as far as my reading goes. And then I also got sidetracked because I just finished playing Hogwarts Legacy for the first time. And if you have played Hogwarts Legacy and you would like fan fiction, I just read some and broke my entire heart. I literally spent this entire morning crying, reading this fan fiction about the characters from Hogwarts Legacy. Yes, we all know I'm a nerd 100% through and through. So I should be going back to reading Throne of Glass. For March as like my whole month goal, I guess. Probably just to dive into the second Throne of Glass because I'm also borrowing that from a friend so I can give her copies of her book back. And probably just take some palate cleansers, maybe read some cheesy rom-coms that I've got sitting on my TBR. But
All right, guys.
to
Think it's that
finish,
time.
yeah, I think it's that time to finish this one up. Like we said, Happy Women's History Month. We hope that you dive into the stories of women, both nonfiction, in real life, and fictional. We'll see you guys next month. Don't forget to follow us on Goodreads, Instagram, the Instagram, Storygraph. And you can listen to our old episodes via our YouTube channel, which I believe is like.literarily.